All right, well, here we go. We are with Hung Lee. Welcome to Unusual Attitudes, Hung. Um, Thank you for taking the time today to speak with us.
My pleasure, Cliff. Thanks for inviting me, man. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. So, my first question for everyone is always the same because we're really curious about who you are. So, who is Hung Lee?
I am a recruiter, Cliff. I still self-identify as a recruiter. So even though it's probably been like 15 years since I last like took a requirement and sent CVs to candidates, to hiring manager, what have you. But my psychology is still I'm in this game. I've done a bunch of things different sort of throughout it. I've been agency, I've been in-house, I've launched a tech company. And these days I'm doing like a media type of business, but it's still interfacing with the entire idea of can we match people to the right jobs? Can we help everyone in that ecosystem kind of do better? And so, when people do ask me the question, what do I do? I still say, hey, I'm kind of in recruitment, even though I'm not a recruiter per se. I still think of myself more or less still in that group.
Do you think most people that are in recruiting had the intention of being in recruiting, or did they find their way there through a series of decisions and choices, or maybe some circumstances that were out of their control?
Oh, I mean, you know the answer to that, Cliff. I mean, you ask that question to 100 people, like 99 of them will say no. I totally fell into it. I was different. I actually chose this. So I remember very clearly coming out of university and thinking, there was a moment like, what the heck am I going to do with my life, etc. But then having done a bit of research, I became very interested in this idea of working in recruitment. Because I was fascinated about how do you make the selection between the right person and the next person? Like, what are the qualities that make the difference? Why is it one person is a brilliant hire in one company, but you move that individual to another business or even another department, and they flop. They perform terribly. Like, what are the conditions that make that happen? So I was always fundamentally interested in that. So I think I'm one of the 1% that actually chose to do this as a career. So put me in that weirdo box because yeah, I chose this, man.
Well, and you didn't start out that way, as you said. I mean, your background, I think it's pretty well known. You talk about it quite often, studying anthropology and
Mm.
philosophy. And I think you've even framed it, and I'd like to explore this just a little bit, as being intentionally unconventional. And you almost designed your career to avoid a typical office job. Tell us a little bit about that part of your journey, because that's difficult. I mean, and how early did you actually know that?
Oh, so this basically, we need to rewind back to I guess my late teens. So in my late teens, we're looking at 15, 16 years old or something like this. I became basically pretty much a hippie, where I thought, you know what, I grew my hair long, had dreadlocks, had all this type of stuff. And it was like, okay, I like want nothing to do with this idea of putting on a suit and going into an office. And this seems like the hell on earth. There's no chance I'm ever going to do this. And so when it came to choosing sort of the academic majors, I think you call them, what I was doing, I was like, okay, I'm not going to choose anything that would get me a job. It was like, I want to do philosophy, I want to do ancient history. At one point, I was going to do Egyptology or something. And I eventually settled on anthropology, which is like the study of human culture. And yeah, my vision at that point was say, okay, I'm going to emerge from this with a different sort of from a different starting point, and I'll end up sort of I don't know being a field worker doing some ethnography somewhere in some random village in South America or something. So that was the vague sort of idea at the university level. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting about that, and what sort of parallels my own journey, is I went to music school in Philadelphia and then was a touring musician. I never went to college or university. I came right out of music school in Philly and went on tour for about a decade, just everywhere in the world. And I toured with a little band. We were the opening act. I wasn't in this band, but the opening act for on tour with Judas Priest. And it sort of gives you this really strange view of the world, almost unrealistic in a lot of ways. But when you're young, and I think I want to dig into this a little bit. When you're young, I think you have to take those kinds of risks. You have to have these really big, passionate visions for yourself. Because when you get older, and it's not a bad thing, but you start to have some pretty significant responsibilities, and you tend to take them seriously. You start to have really anchored relationships that rely on fulfilling some of those responsibilities. So talk to me about risk taking when you're younger, especially for those that are in this kind of very strange world. You millennials,
Yeah.
Gen Z, even I have two very young kids, 6 and 9 years old. They're Gen Alpha. I think there is a real challenge with understanding the level of risk you take, and in some views of some of these generational issues, there seems to be an assumption of a lack of responsibility or commitment. Talk about what you've seen, especially with young professionals, as you've gone around the world. What's the predominant view of their own value and culture?
You're raising some really like fundamentally important points here, Cliff, which is definitely something we need to more deeply discuss. Because I think you're right. As you get older in your life, you're going to accumulate sort of more responsibilities, which constrain your choices. I mean, that's just a normal fact of, accumulating resources, accumulating responsibilities, reducing choices. That's basically the journey. And in fact, the reason why I went into recruitment at the end of the day as a conscious decision, which was a pivot from my previous sort of inclinations, was because I realized I did have responsibilities. And so, the journey I thought I was going to go on, I realized, you know what, I can't pursue that because I have other things I need to take care of, other people I need to take care of. And so into the world of recruiting I went into. Advice to give to kids today, I would be really hesitant to say anything too confidently. I've got to be honest. The world is changing so rapidly that genuinely good advice yesterday could be the worst advice tomorrow. I think that the only thing you could give sort of advice to kids today is to say you've got to be agile, you've got to have portability, you've got to understand that sort of general uncertainty in the external world is a persistent state. There's never going to be a scenario where we think, oh, the change period is over. We're going to settle down now to, what could be 5, 10 years of stability. And we understand this is how it's going to be. You can start doing some, mapping as to how your career is going to work out. I don't see that as necessarily sort of realistic. I think it's just going to be a constant churn. So in that type of scenario, I think the best advice I would give to kids, or best advice I give to anybody, is simply you've got to be as agile as you can in your own individual circumstances. That means you don't have a lot of like weak points in your game. You're a good generalist. You can see opportunity, so you're connected and you can see opportunity and you can see risk before another person. And then you're decisive enough to make a decision when you see those risks and opportunities. Those are the things I would say everyone needs to cultivate right now.
Yeah, I think I would add one to that. It's sort of a predominant, almost persistent feeling that I have, and I can't nail it down in any one particular situation, but it's something that I see all the time, which is, and I run my own team this way, here at Phenom, is to be easy to work with. Now, some might take that as, you're going to be a pushover, right? And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, you have to put yourself in situations where it is imperative that you listen to others' opinions, give them an opportunity to provide their point of view, help evaluate that, even be open to that point of view if you maybe somewhat disagree to it. But being easy to work with has gotten me really, really far in life, because I've had a very, very strange journey myself, very, very unconventional, with the kinds of jobs I have, from musician to restaurant owner to pilot to, and here now, I'm a strategist and technologist. And I actually label myself a bit of an AI anthropologist at this point, really understanding the social impact and the culture impact of artificial intelligence on the world. You would have never thought that of me, at 17 years old as a drummer, with really long hair and wearing ripped jeans and studded metal, belts and things like that when I was touring. But it does take us on strange journeys. But for me, the being easy to work with is just this core value of mine that has so helped me connect with people. What do you think about that? What comes to mind? What's the first thing that you think of when I say be easy to work with?
I think it probably will become like a premium quality as AI kind of levels up the competency game for everyone. So if you imagine a future where everyone has access to this super powered technology that's able to do all of the resourcing, able to do all of the processing, all of the stuff that basically is 90% of white collar work today. If everyone has access to that, then what is the competitive advantage per employee? It's going to be two things, in my opinion, maybe three things. It's going to be your network intelligence. So, in other words, your ability to access information that never gets piped into AI systems. All of the unspoken stuff that isn't documented, the off the record information, your access to that stuff, I think gives you competitive advantage. It's going to come down to your own sort of willpower, your motivation, your internal sort of your intrinsic motivations. That probably will make a difference. And then the third thing is what your point, Cliff, your ability to interact with others such that they want to interact with you again. I mean, it's going to be an important sort of factor. It already is when you think about artisanal choices we make. If we go down the shop, you have a favorite coffee shop, Cliff. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you go to the same hairdresser all the time. Are they objectively the best hairdresser or are they objectively the best barista? Maybe not. But you go there because you know what, you have a great relationship with these people and you're going to give them your business. You want to be in that sort of milieu with them. So I think that kind of artisanal trust is going to come into corporate space. And I think you're absolutely right. Your ability to work well with others and make them feel that they want to work with you is going to be a premium quality.
Well, let's dive into the really hot topic, which you and I get asked about you probably 50 times a day at least, and that's artificial intelligence and how it's changing this business recruiting as a domain. Um, where's your head when you think about the last, and I'll say the last 24 months? We're not talking about that long, but what is it that you're talking about with recruiters? And what I really want to know is, like, what is the fear and what is the hope? So it sort of runs that gamut, right? What are you hearing on both of those?
Yeah, there's a really interesting article I read a couple of months or so ago, which sort of categorized the people that commentate on AI into three big buckets. And I'll introduce the framework here because I think it's been useful for me. And the first bucket is the AI optimist. So these are the people that say, you know what, yes, there is going to be disruption, but the disruption is going to be temporary because in previous sort of scenarios where we've seen technology innovation arrive, we've seen production, but then we've seen a massive expansion of economic activity and lots more jobs created. So actually, that's the future for us. We're going to get a temporary period of adjustment, then we're going to go on and have a great moment. Then you get the pessimists that basically say, "Hey, listen, this time's different. This is different. It's different because we've got self-replicating systems. We've got technology innovation that actually can accelerate its own innovation out of oftentimes seemingly outside of the control of human judgment. So if that's the case, then maybe it kind of replicates to such a point that human beings may no longer have economic value in this system, in which case we have to rework the entire social structure. That's going to be chaos, probably dystopia. So that's the AI pessimist. And then you have the AI skeptics, which says, you know what, guys, everyone's freaking out for no reason. It's going to have some impact, but it won't be as big an impact as you think now. And it's going to be slower, more diffuse. And by the time we actually back on it 15 years down the line, we'll be able to say, hey, there's obviously been change, but we're still around. It was all hyped up. So those are the three big buckets. Now I oscillate between those views, Cliff. I oscillate between those views because I think each one has a compelling argument. And the truth is, I don't think anybody can be overly confident as to which narrative is true, because the future is not made. The future is determined in the present, and we're all interfacing with the present right now. So the things that we do and say today will impact what is going to be happening in that future. So I don't think it's written in stone. I think we all have an obligation to sort of increase our interaction with the public discourse, actually. So we all need to speak up and introduce our own point of view publicly as to what we think and how we think it should go, because I think that does then determine what future we end up having.
Yeah, this is something that I have been championing for 3 or 4 years now as I've become more vocal about artificial intelligence. I'm both a proponent and probably one of its biggest critics as well. And and even working for a company that's developing these technologies and in some cases leading some of these conversations in terms of the innovation. But I think the challenge is actually quite a simple one, and it's answering the question. Let's just assume for a minute that AI is replacing some of the things that we do, right? And we know that that is true, and maybe it's going to be true to a much larger scale over time. But it's certainly true today that there is a percentage of the work that we're doing that will be replaced with artificial intelligence. My big question that I think a lot of leaders have been challenged to answer is, okay, so I'm saving people time. What are we doing with the time we're saving them? Right. And the real question is, and I'd love for you to comment on this, is what is their redefined value in the organization? Because if you can't define how you're going to change someone's value, how they're viewed, and what is the expectation of the work that they are doing at that point, especially in coordination with things like artificial intelligence, then I'm not so sure that someone would stay in an organization very long because they don't understand why they're there. So it's two things. It's understanding the impact of technology, AI being the newest one, obviously, and rapidly advancing, but it's also redefining value. Talk about the value of recruiting in the face of AI.
Yeah, really, really important point, Cliff. And you're referring to something which Peter Hinson refers to as the human premium, which I liberally steal that term because I think it's a wonderful way to describe the stuff that AI basically can't do, or the stuff that we don't want AI to do. What is the human premium? Can we describe it? And our failure to describe it basically means we can't argue for it. And you're absolutely right to raise the question, what happens to the excess time that we create by being more efficient? And the reason I think why technology innovation doesn't actually has never previously led to any utopic environment for us is because that excess time is being captured by a small group of people and not distributed in terms of overall value to the rest of society. Those folks have then gone off and become like oligarchical elites, living ridiculous lifestyles. Everyone else is still grinding. And so we've got a very big moment as a human species in front of us right now. Like, who actually is going to benefit from the innovation? There's a phrase, I think it was the CEO of Box that mentioned this, and he's an AI evangelist, AI first type guy. Many people categorize this individual maybe as one of the bad guys in the sense, oh, all this means redundancies and so on. But he came out with a phrase which I really like, which was, you keep what you kill. Right? You keep what you kill. And I love to have that really embedded in our discourse internally in every organization. So managers should go to their teams and say, you know what, we're going to become more productive. You're mandated to really try and re-engineer our efforts using these technologies now available, but you keep what you kill. So in other words, if you can save 10 hours worth of time in your day, brilliant. You've got that 10 hours. You play with it as you see fit. Go and explore some other ways in which AI can help. Go and work on those other things that companies have long talked about committing to. Diversity, having an inclusive workforce, looking at employee well-being, all of those things that we all say top priority. When the market's good, we all elevate these up as, nothing matters more to us than our people. But guess what? When the market tightens, first thing that goes is layoffs start triggering. Well, okay. If you keep what you kill, then hopefully we can apply at least some portion of that extra time to all of those things that we say we care about, and then create a little bit more of a humane way in which we operate. I think most of us probably would recognize that the the ways in which we work today are generally deleterious to our health. They're certainly not optimal. We spend too long in time grinding away. Our health factors are not there. I think our lifespan is kind of decreasing also. I mean, all the signals are telling us actually we're possibly going down the wrong route here. So how do we recorrect for that? I think arguing for at least some portion of the time saved back to the good stuff that we want to do. That's good. It has to be we have to be politically aware about that commitment.
Yeah, you also reminded me of something else that I think about, and I've heard you talk a little bit about this before. Even phrasing it recruiters love the shiny red ball. My words, not yours, but essentially love the new thing. Let's go experiment. Let's play. But that was not always true, right? Like I think that's true. Maybe over the last 5 to 7 years, realistically, I've been in this industry now for give or take about 15 to 20 years and working with inside the HR domain. Actually, if I go back 10 years, there was it was a very challenging time to get HR professionals, especially recruiters, to think of technology differently. And I think part of it goes back to that value system. We're working in the blue folders, right? And we know how to work the system. We can work the Excel spreadsheet. We can work the email. We can work the phones and do our own text messaging, things of that nature. We've got this system nailed. It's not the most efficient. It may not be the most productive, but we know it, and we're working hard. And there has been, and again, I go back a decade, a very strong resistance to change. And the way that you would describe it as of recently, listening to you talk about it in several different forums across several different mediums, it's maybe flipped a little bit where recruiters are like, okay, wait, now we want everything. But what's really true though? Is it an acceptance of that we need to change? Or is it a reluctant acceptance that we better try something because we can't go back to spreadsheets and blue folders?
Yeah, switching costs is so tough, Cliff. Once you have a system, the system wants to survive. It almost has a life of its own. So I totally, when you mentioned the blue folder stuff, I had a very clear vision as to what that looked like. And there's a good argument as to why that system should be maintained, because those folks are making sort of good effort. They're probably making decent money off it. It's worked before in the past. Why change it? All of those evolutionary instincts are in place. And usually you need a shocking break for that to happen. And the shocking break can come from all kinds of different. COVID was a good example of a shocking break, actually. Suddenly everyone got familiar with video. If you wanted to do a video call pre-COVID with somebody, you wouldn't get the person switching the camera on. It was extremely difficult to actually get to that point where you could do a virtual meeting. COVID happens, big external shocks, 18 months down the line, everyone's totally cool coming on to Zoom. AI, I think, is just executed a similar shock. I mean, right now, the mood within the recruiting industry, as far as I see it, is that, look, if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it, and we're going to be done. So it's like at the extension, we've taken it to the edge of reluctance, so to say, and now it's like, look, we're going to get pushed over this edge. It's like a fight for the parachute now. So we've got to grab those chutes and jump. And that's basically where we're at, and I think that's probably a good thing. I do think we need to embrace it, even if it means, I'm going to defend the shiny new bauble idea, because it's true to say, look, bad recruitment process is not going to be fixed by a shiny new tool. That's a cliche we will all agree with. However, I think sometimes we're at the point now where the shiny new tool is so transformative that it might completely change how that process works, in which case it's better to just dive in and just learn it as you go. There's a concept, again, not endorsing AI first businesses per se, but I've studied the manifestos that these companies have rolled out with. And one of the ones which is actually quite telling is that they accept temporary inefficiency with the new tool in order for you to upskill with the new tool. We're chucking out like ROI basically. We're saying, you know what, we just need to get to this new thing. And it reminds me so much of exactly throwing away those blue folders. There's going to be reticence. There's going to be people complaining. My business intelligence is there. You know, my entire book of candidates is there. There's going to be those complaints, but you got to throw it away because it's almost like burning the boats as you land on the beach. There's no going back.
It's so funny you say that because one of the I swear, in preparation for our discussion, I thought of Cortez, which is what you're talking about, who burned the boats at the shore so that they couldn't go back. They had no choice but to move forward. And I think there's a lot of that happening in the enterprise environment right now, especially with artificial intelligence. Some of the new technologies that are coming in an Internet of Things and blockchain and quantum computing, which is very close on the horizon. These are all innovations that are going to rapidly hit us faster than anything has happened before. And I think our biggest problem right now, I think you're hinting at it, and I'll just call it out, is speed. Like, we do not have 30 years to adopt. Like, you know, it was 30 years to, you know, to essentially adopt, you know, personal computing, you know, in the enterprise space. You know, it was 15 years to adopt internet. It was 10 years to adopt cloud computing. This is coming so rapidly, and I think that is a leader's challenge. Talk about when you are interacting with leaders, people that are making the decisions to buy these technologies and bring them in, and they're typically very well thought individuals and leaders. They know that change is hard. They have probably been through some level of change throughout their career. I don't know that they're given a choice. I think because this is being heaped upon us, and the next the technological break is right around the corner, right? Gen AI was 2 years ago. Agents are on us, you know, and so it's just coming so fast. How do you advise a leader in this environment where the speed of change is almost reactionary?
Yeah, basically, it defeats strategy, right? When the external environment is so volatile, it defeats strategy because you can't sit back and think, oh, here's my 5-year plan. You know, this is how we've mapped it out. The map's going to change as you put the line in it. So again, we go back to the individual responsibility. How can you stay agile? How can you be decisive in moments of uncertainty? And that comes through simply building self-confidence in it. There's a muscle when it comes to taking risk. So, you know, there's all the kind of so-called character traits or personality traits that we love to ascribe as being like completely, genetic, shall we say, or completely fixed in a person. I think some element may be there, but you can absolutely practice this. You can become more resilient over time with a training exercise. You can become more decisive over time with a training exercise. And you can be more agile over time with training exercises. So I think leaders today need to firstly adopt that in and of themselves. Like, they've got to practice what they preach. They can't say, sit back and think, you know, delegate, oh, do the research on this AI, Mr. Junior candidate employee, come back to me with a report. No, you have got to be in there yourself and learning how these technologies transform the way in which you operate. You can't be in a position where you're making a decision in an ivory tower on how people use AI, for instance. I'm reminded, I'm old enough, Cliff, to remember the pre-internet era. So just about getting into the world pre-internet. And I remember speaking to execs at the time that were making internet policy that didn't even have their own email address.
That's
Now,
amazing.
just think about that,
Yeah.
right? This person is deciding.
It's not like not having your own phone number.
Correct. And then telling people how to do sales, right? It makes no sense. I mean, right now we're in that situation with AI, that the leaders need to be the most AI enabled part of that entire structure. It turns out they're the least AI enabled, and the reason why is because they spent all their time building their careers towards a strategic job, right? They wanted to not do the operational stuff, and they wanted to do the strategic stuff, which is just sitting around thinking. Well, that's all well and good, but guess what? What that means is you've also distanced yourself from the technology itself, and that puts you in a very bad position. So you've got to get back into the coal face and you've got to really re-immerse yourself with this technology wave.
And what I take away from what you're saying is something that I talk to leaders all the time. I have the most fun I have in my role at Phenom is as part of my job is I run our customer advisory, and I get to interact with leaders from all over the globe. And there has been a seismic shift in how these leaders, these executives, VPs, SVPs, even C-suite individuals running organizations that would used to distance themselves from understanding the technology. And the really, really good leaders, and I think you're saying this, even in the C-suite, they're like, sitting chairside with recruiters now going, show me this system. Show me what you do every day. Like, why is this transforming the work that we're doing? How is it doing that? And again, how do I help you redefine your value? The really good leaders are no longer distancing themselves from understanding the technology that they've purchased for their ecosystem. They may not be in there every day using it, but they are trying to understand its impact, because this is not like buying just a CRM off the shelf, or using email or something of that nature. I mean, it is very, very transformative. But to your point, good leaders are getting in there and understanding the technology, even if they're not using it every day. And I think that's been a big driver. But it also reminds me of another question for you, which is, what is the constant truth in hiring? We have all this technology coming in, we've got all this transformation and change going on, but what is the one or two things that technology can't replace in hiring?
There's a caveat to this, which I promise not to put caveats into this chat, Cliff, but it's required for this context. And it's basically a concept called collaboration intensity. So in other words, every job has a measurement as to how much it interfaces with other people doing that job. There's some jobs that are very low collaboration intensity. They can get a person can literally go and do it by themselves and be a very good performer with zero or low interaction with other people. That's fantastic. However, those jobs are going to be automated. The jobs that have high collaboration intensity, they're the ones that are going to be the most resilient in this era of AI domination, because something happens when human beings interact together, which is, you mentioned quantum computing, but I think there's a quantum element to that sort of interaction. When you're in a room and you're doing something, you're working together on a project, there's an energy in the room that everyone can feel and everyone knows is real, but it's not quantified, it's not measurable. It's something that's going on within that context. So I would say the thing that remains like fully human is our ability to work together and produce this type of innovation in group work. That's what's going to make the decisive difference. That's when new ideas emerge. That's when like subtle nuances emerge that otherwise would be very difficult to tease out if it's in a textual form or in some sort of like a format of data that requires interpretation. You almost need the human intuition to come back to say, now I get it. Like you get it at a visceral level. It's those moments, I think, that will be the most resilient to AI disintermediation. And we as businesses, I think, will end up, or we as participants in businesses, will end up understanding that those moments are the things that are going to make the differentiator between you and any other AI-enabled business. 5 years down the line, Cliff, every business will be completely festooned with AI enablement. We're already getting up to a level with the LLMs. They're all like pretty amazing. You can pick and choose between them, and only the really far out niche experts will be able to say, yes, Gemini is better than than Llama or whatever. Most 99.9% of the people are still getting magic from all LLMs. So we're going to get to a point where all technology levels up. Then what is the differentiator? The differentiator is going to be, okay, have you got the best humans interacting in the best way to produce this innovation? That's what's going to make the winning business.
I agree. And, I draw some parallels. I work a lot with the recovery community, and there's several reasons for that. Maybe, someday on some podcast, I'll talk about my personal journey there. But the parallel is this. What we have found in the recovery community is when you build a community around the individual, and you allow them to drop their guard a little bit, and maybe a little bit less ego in the room, that really, really great collaboration happens. And I think we've lost some of that, especially in the very, very competitive corporate or enterprise environments, where we're expecting individual and grading individual performance over team performance. And I think I'm starting to see a shift in that. And I think part of what you're talking about is, if technology is the same, right? It doesn't matter. It's almost like I'll equate it to, I used to do a lot of work in advertising, and the IndyCar racing, open wheel racing was one of my clients, and all the cars are the same. Every single car is the same. They're not allowed to deviate in the size of the engine or the tires that they use, the suspensions that they have, or the aerodynamics. So how does a driver win a race? And how do some drivers win multiple races if the car is the same? Well, the answer is the team that's around them, right? The mechanics, the pit crew, the strategists, the psychologists that are working with them to up their mental game, during a race. And, even, the physicality of it, how they're working out, and their trainers. And so there's this huge community, and the average open wheel racing car team is actually about 300 people. It's not just the driver. And so what you're talking about sort of parallels that, like, as technology becomes ubiquitous and it's all the same, it's doing all these great things, and they can all do these great things. The team is the difference. And the leaders that understand that are the ones that will pull far ahead than those that don't. Would you agree with that?
I love this, Cliff, because you've introduced a really important point, which I don't think is emphasized enough, which is how we do performance management today is very individualistic, and we treat everyone as like just a discrete atomic individual performer. We rank that person, whatever grading system we have, we rank them, but we don't at all think, hang on, how does this person interact with the team? How is the team contributing to that performance? And if we take the team sort of view and grade the team instead of the individual, I think we'll suddenly start we'll start valuing different personalities and different contributors in a different way. Because, as you say, there's a dynamic that emerges when groups of people work together that can't be, disaggregated into individual actions per se. It's the togetherness. I'm pleased you use the concept of sports. I mean, I'm a big sports fan, and you look at sports teams, I think you can learn so much about what we're talking about right here. Why is it that one elite performer is just a star player in Team A? He gets himself a transfer or a move to a different organization. Suddenly, his performance drops through the floor. Has he suddenly biologically changed that much? Or is it because there's something in the team dynamic which doesn't quite fit with his behavior or actions? It's going to be that latter. So our ability to understand that type of fit, I think, is going to be critical for competitive businesses going forward.
I agree. Yeah, I use sport all the time, and I'm going to get this somewhat wrong, and but folks can use Perplexity or Google. Funny that we say that now, to get it right. But there was a really great TED talk from a scientist who talked about comparing runners, and he looked at Jesse Owens, in the 30s Olympic Games, and how fast he ran the 100-meter versus Usain Bolt running the 100-meter a few years ago in the current Olympics. And why is Usain Bolt so significantly faster? And was it that in just less than 100 years, human beings have just physically become that much stronger and faster? And the answer was no. It's actually not true. Jesse Owens at the time was running essentially on dirt, and so the traction wasn't there, and he was running almost barefoot because the shoe technology wasn't great. So he goes, you put those two factors in and look at what Usain Bolt is running on a padded track with some of the best footwear that has ever been developed. And all these things add up to making him faster. Now, is he physically faster? Yeah, but not by, this, I think it was like 3 or 4 seconds faster. I know I'm probably getting that wrong, but it was significantly faster than Jesse Owens. So when you remove all those factors, you remove all the technology, the human element was only a fraction of a second faster. right? But it does show you the impact of technology, even on something like sport. The impact of technology is significant when you understand how to leverage it, right? And then you build that team around you to be able to do that. Is that something, and how often are you using sport as an analogy to make your points, especially, in the recruiting domain? Because it is a bit of a sport, isn't it?
It is, and it's not easy to make the make the analogy directly, Cliff, because over the last 5, 6 years or so, probably the concept of like team fit and team dynamics and culture fit and stuff like this, we've kind of moved pretty aggressively away from that because it's associated with things like bias and hiring for the same types of person and stuff like this, and all that stuff is bad, so to say. But I think we need to rehabilitate the idea that a human being's performance is within context. And most like I say, let's divide the jobs between the ones that are completely remote action versus the ones that have some sort of collaboration intensity. The ones that we're talking about today are the ones that collaborate. Okay, that person's performance cannot be isolated from what's happening with the rest of the group. And in fact, you're going to make all kinds of attribution problems if you start trying to do that. If you speak to software development teams, they will tell you straight away that this is what happens. Like, how can you tell a software developer and a team of 10 developers, like, oh, this guy's amazing, or that girl's great? How can you pull that together? The code is getting merged. They're working together to get there. There's going to be some hidden values. There may be one person that basically may not submit a lot, but they're the person that answers all of the questions and does all the brainstorming and solves the problem for everyone else. It's not collected. It's not captured. But you remove that person from the system, and all of the performance of team drops down. So we've got to get much more sophisticated with capturing sort of performance in context. And maybe the simple way to do that is elevate the analysis to team level, as you mentioned, rather than focus on individual.
I agree. The advice that I've been giving, I had lunch with a CHRO of a large regional bank a couple months ago, and we were talking about this particular subject, and he had asked me, what are the differences that I notice in teams that perform really well versus ones that aren't or are struggling in some way. And I said, well, it really does come down to the leader, and the leader deeply analyzing the strengths and weaknesses, not of individuals, but of the team. And the really great leaders, whatever their next hire is, as a position opens up, as they expand the team or they replace someone that might have left, is they're hiring for the weakness of the team and not necessarily for the role. So if you look at a team of, we'll use engineers, programmers, right? And a leader's analyzing them and says, we're really, not great at communicating with clients. So my next hire, it might be, a Python engineer or, whatever it is, right? Somebody that has a particular technical skill. The technical skill is irrelevant. It's important to the role, of course, and you need someone that's going to do it. But I also am going to find someone that's a great communicator to clients so that we can be better at getting our message out. And the really great team leaders understand the dynamic of these values and skills and the culture within their team. And they're always hiring for their weaknesses to make the team stronger. And they communicate that with the team. Hey, we kind of suck at X. The next person we bring in, I'm going to interview, and we're going to kind of do group interviews or however we're going to, we got to find somebody that has the skill because it's going to make us all better. Is that something that you see value in terms of that approach?
I think everyone would agree we see value in it, but it's vanishingly rare.
Yeah.
On abstract, everyone's going to sign up to this idea, of course, yes. But when it comes down to actually translating it into jobs that actually get created, very rarely do we factor this stuff in. I mean, the context you're talking about, I think that emerges in some contexts, typically very early stage, like if you're in a founding team or something in a startup. That I think is quite common for founders to discuss like this. But by the time you get to, workforce planning level, where companies are thinking, oh, we need X amount of skills in this, we're not really thinking along those same lines. And we probably don't devolve the responsibility of thinking along those lines to the team itself. So yeah, it's one of those, maybe it's a problem of scale. but we don't often see that outside of that small team context.
Do you think that it's the failure to be able to work in a way where you can identify team weakness and hire regardless of what the actual role is a byproduct of job descriptions? Because I will make this statement: I really, really hate job descriptions. I think they are the bane of the existence of this domain, and I think the sooner we can get rid of them, the better we're going to be in the traditional sense, right? Like we're stuck, and I think part of the reason we're stuck there is because of the technology that we use, and ATSs force us in a way to think about work in this siloed manner. That this is the job, this is the description of the job, this is how we're going to help you evaluate. And there are better ways of doing it, but I think we've tied ourselves to a legacy technology that is disallowing us to think differently. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this your self-description as an AI anthropologist is very accurate, Cliff, because you have just described a classic piece of anthropology where a technology or an innovation then later informs the cultural practices that emerge from it. And a grokkable example for everyone here is calendar management. The reason why our conversation here is like 45 minutes long is because basically the calendar tells us that actually 60 minutes is max. We've got the next thing going on. So our entire world is chopped into 60-minute chunks, if not 60 minutes and 30-minute chunks. Why? Because of, again, the calendar management. And in the same way, the use of CV and job description as the central artifacts that kind of move around our system, we've then architected the entire ecosystem around these artifacts being moved around. And then our processes move around those artifacts. And as you say, it prevents us from kind of moving beyond. I do think AI transforms this. I think AI is one of those, the reason why we call it a transformative, general transformative technology is because it might just sweep all of that stuff away. Because it's increasingly obvious that trying to capture information in a static document is not going to give you a good view of reality. And in fact, as soon as I've captured that document, it's going to sort of the content decay starts immediately. I could accurately describe your job today, Cliff. Maybe I'm a great job description writer. I could write it out, and you know what? It may be there or thereabouts within the time I kind of press save. But tomorrow, that gets worse. The day after, it gets less relevant, and it keeps on going until actually your job's totally evolves as nothing like the job description I wrote. So how do we keep current? Again, I think AI does that helps us do that because it can monitor activity, it can monitor interest, it can potentially solve the problem of surveillance, so to say. Prior to the arrival of artificial intelligence, the requirement would be for you to constantly update your job description. Whenever a new thing happened, you'd have to constantly update it, and obviously that would be hugely impractical, hugely onerous. But now we see, okay, everything we're doing is digital. We can track your behavior. We can track how that works. We can track your skills development. We suddenly might have a living record which moves and evolves as you move and evolve, which I think, changes what that is. The job description is alive rather than just a static document as a snapshot of a moment.
Yeah, I talk about this in the sense of blockchain, that whether we like it or not, our data is going to be out there. And why not leverage it in a positive way? Because the LinkedIn's of the world, great platform. I think actually one of the better professional social platforms out there, and there are several others. But what I don't like about it is I have to go in and make that update. And it's really challenging. So like the average age record, of a profile on professional social media is like 18 to 24 months. And you've talked about this before, like that recruiters are working with historical data, not current data, and that's been the impetus for, I think, a lot of the work that you do now is trying to modernize the way that we interact with available data. Let me ask for a little bit of future prediction, but I'm going to ask it a little bit differently than you might have been asked in the past, which is, what you obviously will have a vision of where you think things should go. Whether they come true or not, sort of irrelevant. But what is your vision of how you would like to see this domain evolve? Like, what is the experience of an applicant, a candidate, a recruiter, in your view, based on what you know today?
So this is the world as it should be. The world as it should be we have benign AI, which is sovereign to the person who's owning it, which is the individual, that can advise that individual as and maybe even guide or even operate on behalf of that person to identify future job opportunities for them. Now, that could be within an organization, that could be within the open market, it could be simply changing the job that you're currently in. But it would be able to basically be your best friend to guide you as to and have conversations with you to discuss where is the best direction of travel based on your current capabilities and interest. From a recruiter's point of view, I think what a recruiter's job, certainly that's going to transition away from a lot of the things we're currently doing. I think it's going to be it's going to be a lot more community driven, in my opinion. A lot more about getting information that is never collected by artificial intelligence. There is tons of that, by the way. I challenge the listeners of this podcast to say, okay, what are the most important conversations that you've ever had in your life? Guarantee you, almost all of them have never been recorded. It's the off the record stuff that often drives the decision making. I think the future recruiter will be a person that is curating environments where those types of conversations where people feel free to have those chats. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that's always plugged in. We get that, that's normal, but that is the professional life, that's all fine. But when you need to kind of really have a passion or certain things you can't share, in the same fashion, ability to tap into that conversation, I think will differentiate the recruiter from the next person. We're going to change how sort of people interact with organizations. Previously we always had a very discrete separation between who is in group, as in an employee, and who is out group, the market. We'd have this wall inside and out, but that's going to be a lot more permeable. People are going to flow through a business and interact with it in different ways other than being a full-time employee. Maybe they'll interact with it as a kind of a leader of a bunch of AIs that could deploy services to that organization. So we're in a very interesting space. The only thing that I'm telling myself is you've just got to keep being agile as much as you can, because you can't predict exactly what that future looks like, and you've got to just be able to sense the opportunities and be decisive when they emerge.
So always be learning has been my lifelong motto. So I think this conversation has been amazing, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with my audience and give us your insights and your vision. Where can people find you? I obviously know where, but let's let the audience know where they can find you.
You know what? I'm Googleable these days, and in fact, I think I'm even like I think I'm actually outputted into things like ChatGPT these days. So I'm in the
You are,
training
yeah.
data, which, to be honest with you, is something probably of an unfair advantage now. So there's another thing we haven't talked about, but the idea of being in like generative SEO is probably something a lot of businesses need to think about. But anyway, subscribe to the newsletter. Recruitingbrainfood.com comes out every week. It's free. Don't upgrade to paid. It's exactly the same as free. Just subscribe to it on free, and you'll get the newsletter and be able to interact with me through that app.
Hung Lee, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Cliff. We have to do it again, man. We left a lot unsaid.
We left a ton unsaid. I look forward to the next conversation. Thank you.